Worden helps homeowners, real estate investors, and self-employed individuals turn their property equity into sustainable retirement income without leaving money on the table from taxes or missed opportunities or outdated strategies. So he is here to help us and show us how we can retire on real estate. He has a new book called Retire on Real Estate, and it's your step-by-step guide to creating lasting financial freedom through property. So Mr. Kerry Worden, his phone number is 510-999-0539. That's 510-999-0539. And his websites are buckeyebasecamp.com and, more importantly, realretirementstrategies.com. So we are here to get educated, to get informed about how we can take control of our future, our retirement, and our money by figuring out passive income, figuring out real estate, and doing it in a responsible and proper way. So, Mr. Kerry, how are you today?
Hey, Robert. Thanks for that great introduction, and also thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk about what I do.
Happy to do it. And so what do you think I left out of that introduction? What just has you so fired up, excited about possibilities with real estate?
Well, when you mentioned my BuckeyeBasecamp.com website first, and that's actually a short-term rental property that I've developed. You'll find if in my book, there's a section on short-term rentals, as that's one way for people who are retiring, or particularly realtors who are retiring, to develop their income using short-term rentals and that's kind of my strategy. In fact, the house that I'm sitting in right now will be my second short-term rental as soon as I can figure out what to do with my wife and my mother-in-law.
Figure out where the people go. It's the hard part, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Have to live somewhere.
I bought this house specifically for it to be a short-term rental. I needed a space for my mother-in-law, so it's 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and plenty of space for us. But this is not a short-term rental. The other one, everybody who's looking at this, BuckeyeBasecamp.com, it's come and visit. It sleeps 20 people, and it's in the Motherlode and close to Yosemite, 45 minutes, depending on traffic, to the gate in Yosemite. But I know that's not what we're here to talk about, but in terms of real estate, that's kind of what excites me.
Yeah, but it fits a little bit because I can already tell that you're interested in the variety, right? Because like real estate, I think when people are not creative or imaginative, they just think like, okay, I'll buy some house and I'll rent it out. But it seems like there are many vehicles, right? There are many possible paths to success when it comes to building our wealth and getting passive income.
That's right. And the short-term rental has a unique attribute to it in that you can set it up as a business so that if you have negative cash flow, and I will tell you firsthand, getting one of these things up and running, there can be a lot of negative cash flow. And if your regular long-term rental is just being held for investment purposes, you can't deduct the losses or the negative cash flow unless you do some other techniques. And in my book, I talk about that issue. It's called, passive activity loss limitations, and how short-term rentals can help there.
Well, wonderful. And I think that's really important because sometimes we get really like screwed over on taxes or other costs. And then we talk to a money guy or like you or an investor, and they say, hey, if you instead like run this as a business or you do short-term rental, then there are ways to categorize the money, right? There are things you can do as far as your financial planning where if you were not careful or you did not have a strategy, you lose money. But in this other way, then you make money. And so if someone comes to you and says, well, hey, you're opening my eyes to the possibilities of these STRs, these short-term rentals, like what should I know? Or maybe like, what do you wish you'd known going in?
Well, that the tax issue there, but the other thing is, I think, in my book, it's got a subtitle or kind of a chapter heading. It asks the question: short-term rental for retirement, is it overload? I think I call it opportunity or overload. I think is what I call it,
Okay.
and it really can be an overload. Here I am, not retired yet, and I have two businesses, and really, this morning, why I'm wearing this shirt, I was over there working on that property a little bit. People checked out last night, and it really can be overload if you're not ready for it. But it's very helpful, particularly for people trying to get ready to retire. Let's say, it's maybe a good way, and especially those higher earning years or higher income years where their tax is high, and maybe they want to continue to invest in real estate. And by the way, we didn't say it, but I have a subtitle. I think that's the term, subtitle in my book. It's called
Okay.
Retire on Real Estate, or the Realtor's Retirement Plan, because I've been doing classes for real estate offices for quite some time. And, the classes are really designed, or, my promotion of them is to help realtors to get more business, to close more listings or sales, because if they learn the techniques that I'm teaching, they can then go out and talk to their clients about these things more intelligently. But if I've got 10 or 15 people in this class, I might get more business for them for their own use, or for family members or something, than for them to go out and get more business. I find that to be very interesting. Uh, you know, uh, and particularly, I would say, for a reverse mortgage, right? In my book, I talk about, and classes that I've taught are about how you can free up the equity in your home to then do other things with it. And realtors often have not saved as much money in a 401k and so forth as regular employees have. And all of us in the real estate business, I've spent most of my career as a mortgage broker. It's very cyclical, and our income is very what's the word I'm looking for? It's
Unstable.
unstable. That's a good one. And that's
Okay.
really what it is. And so if we don't have as much money just sitting in a 401k or in brokerage accounts, so we're always, especially getting ready to retire, we're looking for ways to use what we know. And maybe a short-term rental can really help with that. And a lot of times we have built up a lot of equity in our homes, particularly in California, right?
Mhm.
Home values, there's what we call our accidental millionaire client base, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're able to use that, I have a case study in my book about people who, I think there's several use cases of reverse mortgages in my book, but one of them is they bought a cabin, right? So people worry often about that they're giving up some of the equity in their home that they really wanted to pass on to their heirs, but they can use that as a vehicle to buy more real estate. And so then they they bought this cabin, create some extra short-term uh, income or short-term rental income, and have something else to share with their family now, and more appreciating real estate to leave to their kids.
Very cool. Very nice. And that's what we want in money and life in the future in general, to just like safely and steadily grow in many spots instead of just growing one, and have it perhaps be more like diversified and safer. And so like when you hear about short-term rentals, you hear about setting it up in like a tourist location, right? Like you have like Yosemite-Area, you have that cabin, and maybe someone's has a big group. They have 20 people that can sleep in the big cabin, and so they can like get on Airbnb or Verbo and book the slots, and then they show up and like you have the place and you have a code they can get in and you've cleaned it, and then there's the house rules. And so you hear about how it's great for these like vacation spots where there might be an off season, or you might only have like occupancy half the time. And then my understanding is because it's more like a quasi hotel, you get a higher like rent, so to speak, right? Because they're just like renting it for a few days or weeks, and then in between you like have the cleaner come in, or and so on. But that's just my layperson's understanding. Like, how would you describe the short-term rental process?
Well, it's a very developed industry at this point, and what I found out as I'm getting into it is there's a lot of companies out there that will work with you and to handle a lot of that, a lot of the duties that people used to think they had to do on their own, and and not having the knowledge to do it. Like, for example, just the property management software. We call them PMS or PMPs, property management platforms or property management software. There's 100 of them. I use one called Hostfully, but there's Hostaway, and I can't think of the other names, but there's a ton of them. And then for finding people to clean for you and to manage that, there's a company called Turno, and there's 100 others of those. And then how do you price it? Well, I use one called Price Labs, but there's hundreds of those also out there. That if you really don't want to manage it yourself, you can hire property managers. In fact, now my social media is full of people wanting to, showing me how I could manage 20 other properties and, have that be my business. But and I don't really want to do that. But it's not bad. So there's lots of help out there. If you want to do a short-term rental, you can just start asking questions on social media or something. You'll get all kinds of people wanting to service you, to be able to offer things for you.
Yeah, wonderful. So there's many solutions. There's a website. There's a company for all of it, right? For getting the all the logistics figured out, and how to price it, and so on. So I imagine if someone out there is already talking themselves out of it, because us human beings, we're great at that, right? Well, should I go to that party? Should I go meet that friend? And you come up with all kinds of excuses automatically. But when it comes to your retirement and your financial future, if you find yourself doing that, maybe we should listen to Mr. Kerry and say, hey, all these obstacles that you're already inventing in your head, there are ways around that. So that way you don't have to build yourself another job, right? You live your whole life to this point, and then you say, well, I don't want to be in my 70s and 80s still unclogging the toilet or putting in a new bathtub. You say, well, there are companies that will do that for you. And then you are just more of like the manager, or even better, the investor. And so you mentioned in your book, there's short-term rentals, and you also mentioned reverse mortgage, and those have kind of got sound sort of scary, right? There's like all the kind of weird shady commercials and like Tom Selleck, and they say things like, well, you've got all this equity built up in your home because us Californians, like, the real estate costs a lot, but then the positive of that is that we're the accidental millionaires. We have all this equity, but then when you hear about this idea of like you're slowly pulling equity out of your home, and you wonder, well, will I run out of money before, will I outlive my money, things like that. You say, well, you can pull that out and then use it to grow more money. But what you tell me, if someone is a little bit wary of the reverse mortgage idea, what would you say to that person?
Get some education. We really need to, and that's part of what I do. Is I am a mortgage broker, and I spend time trying to educate realtors and financial planners. As a matter of fact, I spent the last 3 years working with the Silicon Valley chapter of the Financial Planning Association. I was the treasurer, and then the president, and then the past president. And now I'm off the board this year. But my purpose there as an affiliate, I guess they would call us, it was to educate them on how they can use a reverse mortgage to help their clients to not outlive their other assets that they're managing for them, their stocks and bonds and so forth. And in addition to just not outliving those, but to use a reverse mortgage to help them to really reduce their tax liability. And there are a number of strategies for that. There's a guy named Dr. Wade Pfau, who was kind of my mentor. In fact, he was running the RICP, which stands for Retirement Income Certified Professional Program at the American Academy of Financial Services. And so I went through that and got that designation because he just really has great advice for and great knowledge in retirement planning in general. In fact, let me see, do I have his book laying right here somewhere? It's got what I consider kind of the Bible of retirement income planning. I can't remember the title of that book, but it's Dr. Wade Pfau. Go check him out if you want to.
Okay.
Anyway, he talks about how to use a reverse mortgage for tax planning. And some of that has to do with offsetting the tax liability that'll be created when you do Roth conversions, for example. And there's a number of other strategies that you can use. And really, what I was trying to impart to the financial planning community is if you have people that have zero tax, or excuse me, zero mortgage on their house, right? They're retiring, and why not put a reverse mortgage line of credit on there? The reverse mortgage line of credit has some interesting attributes. It grows and grows and never stops growing. And in fact, it grows at the same rate as any balance grows. So let's say somebody had a small mortgage balance, let's call it $100,000, for example. But they might have a $500,000 or $600,000 line of credit. Well, the loan balance is growing at whatever rate it's growing at. The line of credit will grow at exactly the same rate. So it's like growing at 5 times as much. And then let's say the worst happens and 2008 comes back again, right? And the value of the house never goes up. Guess what? That line of credit is going to continue to grow anyway, whether the house goes up or not. So it really is a good financial planning and retirement planning tool. And it's hard for me to think of a situation where somebody wouldn't at least consider it. There may be some reasons that they just really don't want to do it, but the majority of the reason that people won't do one in retirement is because they don't have the education. They haven't taken the time to really explore how it could be beneficial for them. There is some upfront cost to it. There's a couple of different versions of reverse mortgages. Some we call proprietary or jumbo, and they have higher interest rates and not as many elder protection attributes built into it. But the HECM, what we call a HECM, which is Home Equity Conversion Mortgage, is insured by FHA, been around since Ronald Reagan was in the presidency. It was created to help senior citizens to live in their house for as long as they want to. And so it has a lot of features built into it. I didn't mean to go off on such a tangent there. I put my instructor hat on there for a minute. Sorry about that.
But tangents are okay because it's like there's so many things, especially when it comes to money, where it's good to just know what it is. And sometimes we have to get a little small dose of it again and again, so that way when it comes time to speak to a professional like yourself or another RICP, if they say, oh yeah, heck, I've heard of that, and let's explore that. That way you're not being overwhelmed, because it can be overwhelming, right? If we're kind of cramming for a test, so to speak. But if we just kind of learn the acronyms, learn the lay of the land, then when it does come time to make some decisions, then we have thought it through. So tangents are good just to kind of get some of these ideas planted in our head. And it is unfortunate that financial literacy is not really talked about in schools, and it seems to be kind of like a taboo subject to talk about as an adult. But at some point, we have to figure this out, right? Even if we say, well, I'm not good with money or I'm not good with numbers. Well, if that's the case, then you're going to really struggle in retirement, versus you learn just enough and you know who to ask for help and you get somewhat of an education, then you can have a much better outcome. And as you've been saying, a better outcome for not just you, but your family and what you leave behind as far as that financial legacy. And so it's been great to find out about the possibilities, about the terms, about the tools in the toolbox. But because you are the star of the show today, Mr. Kerry Worden, I want to make sure we focus on what's important to you. So in this conversation we're having, do you think there might be a missing question that I should be asking you? I just don't know what to ask you.
Well, we didn't even get into the tax deferral strategies that I have available. At least we talked about using a short-term rental as a tax deferral strategy and a reverse mortgage, but Delaware statutory trust, deferred sales trust, opportunity zone, historic preservation easements, things like that. There's just too much for a 20-minute podcast to dig into any of them. And so one of my challenges is teaching, having the format to teach. You never know which one of those, which strategy is going to be the one that's going to really resonate with people. So I don't know if I've answered your question correctly. All I could think of is that there's so much more to cover.
Yeah. And that is helpful that we just scratched the surface. And if someone says, okay, I'm more excited and interested about these possibilities than when I first started listening to this conversation, right? They might say that they dread retirement or they're not looking forward to it, but it's coming whether you want it or not for all of us, right? It's what we're all going to get old and get to need to that point where we have some kind of money saved up. And so we should look into this. And we should be contacting you. And we're hoping that by exploring a few possibilities, that the next logical step would be for someone to check out your book called Retire on Real Estate and or check out your website. So if someone says, okay, what are some next steps here, Kerry, where should they go?
Just go to my website, realretirementstrategies.com, which is more than anything, it's a landing page for my other websites because I have a tax deferral strategies website, which is defertax.com. I have a reverse mortgage dedicated website called smileandretire.com. I have, I do private mortgages. One of the strategies in my book is that if you want to retire on real estate is maybe you want to be a private mortgage lender. And so I have a commercial real estate mortgage website. So go there and then you can explore and find things that resonate with you, things that might work for you. And you can call me. My phone number's there. My email address is there. And we can continue the discussion.
Very nice. Very exciting. And so go there, get educated. And then when it comes time to speak with Kerry, then you will already have learned a few tips and tricks. And then when he comes and says, well, hey, here's a customized plan for you based on what you told me, then it's less of drinking from a fire hose and you know more of what you're getting yourself into. So realretirementstrategies.com is the hub to check that out. And we've been speaking with Kerry Worden, who has decades of experience across financial planning, tax deferral, mortgage management, and retirement income strategies. He's your trusted guide to a secure financial future. And then that book we also mentioned is called Retire on Real Estate, or the Realtor's Retirement Plan. You can find that by searching Kerry Worden on Amazon. We'll also have a link to that. And that one helps you take control of your financial future with clarity, strategy, and confidence. It's perfect for real estate professionals approaching retirement, if you're looking to build passive income through property, or if you're an investor who wants stability in your later years, then you need to check out that book, Retire on Real Estate, or the Realtor's Retirement Plan by Kerry Worden, whose website is realretirementstrategies.com. And as Kerry said, you go there, you get educated, and then when it's time to click the button, there is a contact button. You can fill out a form, find his phone number, and start that conversation, get to that next step. And as we're heading there, it's time for the scary part of the podcast, Mr. Kerry, where I try to stump you, I try to put you on the spot, by asking you about a fun or interesting quote or lesson that has served you. So what comes to mind as far as a fun or interesting quote or lesson?
Ask me that one more time. What a fun or interesting quote or lesson? What
Fun or interesting quote or lesson?
of anything? Funny thing.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of a quote from the movie "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" Didn't we mention something about that earlier?
Yeah, we said one in the can. Oh, brother,
Yeah,
we're out there.
yeah, but I can't think of anything. I'm sorry if I've screwed up your podcast by not being able to come up with one.
Well,
Fun or
that's fair
interesting?
enough. But as if not a quote, how about like you've dealt with many people in retirement, figuring out their money. Is there like a just a simple lesson when it comes to money or retirement that comes to mind?
A simple lesson that's
Yeah.
easier. And that is, don't be scared. Just keep going. I'm gonna I'm gonna get a tattoo on my arm right here that has DFQ. And do you want me to say what it means?
Yes,
Don't
please.
don't F and quit. Keep
Ooh, I
going.
like it. And,
Yeah.
and it, isn't it Warren Buffett has something that says like when others are fearful, that's your time to be more courageous, and when others are being more courageous, that's your time to be fearful. I think about that a lot. When if
Yeah,
it's
that is a good quote. I wish I could remember it. It was not quite right what you said, but you got the idea of it for sure.
yeah, but it's kind of the idea of don't let the fear win and don't be driven by the emotion and definitely don't go with the masses and chart your own path and think things through strategically, especially with a very skilled person such as Mr. Kerry Worden, whose website we said is realretirementstrategies.com. You want to give him a phone call, that's 510-999-0539. And the book is Retire on Real Estate, or the Realtor's Retirement Plan. So thanks, Mr. Kerry, for showing up, stopping by, and educating us about smart retirement planning, building a real estate portfolio that grows with you, and so much more. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Thanks, Robert.
Heck yeah.